A young man defeated a giant with nothing but a stone and his faith, then became a king chosen by God. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to explore how a man who was granted absolutely unimaginable power managed to hold on to perfect humility. We're diving into the epic story of Prophet Dawud, also known as David, to see exactly how he balanced having immense worldly strength with a deeply, deeply submissive heart. You know, this verse beautifully sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about. It reminds us that true gratitude is actually incredibly rare, especially when you have everything. I mean, it's one thing to be grateful when you're in need, right? But ultimate power usually breeds arrogance. Yet Dawood's family was explicitly commanded to embody thankfulness through their actions. He was the exception to the rule. Let's start by looking at the divine bounty and how he became the blessed Khalifa. So Allah made Dawood incredibly strong in his land, granting him this massive kingdom and a level of wisdom that far surpassed ordinary men. He was elevated to what's called a Khalifa, a vicegerent or successor in the land. And this meant his authority wasn't just political, it was a divine trust. Just imagine the sheer weight of that for a second, being personally responsible for upholding truth and justice across an entire empire. But what's truly wild about David is the sheer scale of his miracles. When he glorified Allah, the physical world literally joined in with him. The texts describe how the mountains and the birds were actually subjected to him, forming this beautiful celestial chorus of worship. When David raised his voice, the environment didn't just passively listen, it actively participated. Just picture this in your mind. Imagine the majestic, echoing sound of huge mountains and soaring birds, all perfectly harmonizing with a human voice. The very stones of the earth and the creatures of the sky became his congregation. It's such a profound illustration of his spiritual magnitude. Moving on to his physical strength, let's look at the power in his hands and the miracle of iron. Allah actually made iron soft like wax in his hands, teaching him how to craft intricate armor. And get this, surprising fact, the sources suggest he did this literally without fire or heavy tools. Before this, armor was super rigid, heavy, and clunky. But with iron made soft and pliable just for him, Dawud could effortlessly weave these links of metal, creating flexible, impenetrable defense. So the real game changer here is how he used this immense physical power. It was used purely for peace. Notice the language in the source material. To protect you against your violence. His strength was designed as a shield, not a sword. He didn't use this miracle to conquer or pillage. He used it to preserve life. Now we hit the absolute core of who he was. The heart of a slave and the penitent worshiper. It's an incredible contrast, honestly. You've got this mighty king who owns a vast kingdom, right? But despite all that, Dawud spent long periods of time weeping in deep prostration. On paper, a man with a massive army and the ability to bend solid iron shouldn't be crying on the floor. But he deeply recognized that all his worldly power was entirely dependent on the true king. He never, ever let the intoxication of power distract him. He didn't let the demanding administrative duties of running a vast state rob him of his intimate connection with his creator. He was, above all else, a humble, penitent worshiper. And because of this deep humility, he was commanded to be an impartial judge. This specific verse warns him not to follow his own desires, lest they lead him astray. The ultimate test of his power wasn't fighting battles. It was his ability to lay his own ego aside and govern solely based on divine truth. Let's see how this actually played out in real life. We're looking at the weight of justice in a fascinating case known as the Vineyard Dispute. So picture this. Two men stand before Dawud in the shadows of the royal court. One man has had his entire livelihood ruined, and the other man owns the flock of sheep that caused the damage. The sheep had strayed at night and completely devastated the first man's fields. It's a classic, tough case of negligence, and they came to the king for a fair resolution. Dawud rules with strict, impartial justice. Based on the exact value of the ruined crops, he decides that a direct, permanent transfer of the flock to the vineyard owner is fair compensation. Honestly, it was a totally correct, logical judgment that satisfied the immediate debt. But here's where it gets really interesting. Dawud's son and heir, Prophet Suleiman, steps in and offers an incredibly nuanced alternative that perfectly showcased restorative justice. Suleiman, who was also granted immense divine wisdom, saw a way to not just settle the financial debt, but to restore both men without permanently bankrupting the sheep owner. Suleiman comes up with this brilliant plan to ensure the victim is sustained while the offender repairs the damage. The sheep owner must physically work the land to restore the ruined vineyard. Meanwhile, the vineyard owner gets to hold on to the sheep, benefiting from their milk and wool. And once the vines are fully fixed, the sheep go back, the damage is repaired, and everyone is made whole again. The sources make it absolutely clear that both prophets possess profound divine wisdom, but Dawud humbly accepted the superior ruling of his son. I mean, think about the sheer humility that takes. A mighty king publicly accepting an amended judgment from his own son simply because it was the better path. His ego was completely out of the picture. Which brings us to his ultimate legacy, a legacy of humility, and what true strength actually looks like. Prophet Dawud leaves behind a legacy that proves true strength isn't about how much you can conquer, but how deeply you can submit. He had the physical power to bend solid iron, but far more importantly, he had the spiritual discipline to bend his own will to the divine command. He literally had the world at his fingertips, yet his heart belonged entirely to the hereafter. As the sun set on his ancient kingdom, with the birds returning to the sky in peace, he left behind a society where the weak were protected, the laws were fair, and the Creator was constantly beautifully praised. I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on today. If a man who had the mountains echoing his voice and empires at his feet could drop to his knees in tears of humble submission, how can any of us justify arrogance in our own lives? It's a pretty powerful reminder to anchor our hearts no matter what successes we might find in this world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.